herself. She was not interesting. Michael Garfield looked slightly surprised. I shouldn't think so, he said. Does she have to be? It is my view that people devoid of interest are unlikely to be murdered. People are murdered for gain, for fear, or for love. One takes one's choice, but one has to have a starting point. He broke off and glanced at his watch. I must proceed. I have an engagement to fulfill. Once more, my fellations. He went on down, following the path and picking his way carefully. He was glad that for once he was not wearing in his tight, patent leather shoes. Michael Garfield was not the only person he was to meet in the sun garden that day. As he reached the bottom, he noticed that 3 paths led from here in slightly different directions. At the entrance of the path, sitting on a fallen trunk of a tree, a child was awaiting him. She made this clear at once. I expect you are Mr. Hercule Poirot, aren't you? She said. Her voice was clear, almost bell-like in tone. She was a fragile creature. Something about her matched the sun garden, a dried or some elf-like being. That is my name, said Poirot. I came to meet you, said the child. You are coming to tea with us, aren't you? With Mrs. Butler and Mrs. Oliver, yes. That's right, that's Mummy and Aunt Adeline, she added, with a tone of censure. You're rather late. I am sorry, I stopped to speak to someone. Yes, I saw you. You were talking to Michael, weren't you? You know him. Of course, we've lived here quite a long time. I know everybody. Poirot wondered how old she was. He asked her. She said, I'm 12 years old. I'm going to boarding school next year. Will you be sorry or glad? I don't really know till I get there. I don't think I like this place very much. Not as much as I did, she added. I think you'd better come with me now, please. But certainly, I must apologize for being late. Oh, it doesn't really matter. What's her name? Miranda. I think it suits you, said Poirot. Are you thinking of Shakespeare? Yes. Do you have it in lessons? Yes, Miss Emmeline reads us some of it. I asked Mummy to read some more. I liked it. It has a wonderful sound. A brave new world. There isn't anything really like that, is there? You don't believe in it, do you? There is always a brave new world, said Poirot, but only, you know, for very special people, the lucky ones, the ones who carry the making of that world within themselves. Oh, I see, said Miranda, with an air of apparently seeing with the utmost ease, though what she saw, Poirot rather wondered. She turned, started along the path, and said, We go this way. It's not very far. You can go through the hedge of the garden. Then she looked back over her shoulder and pointed, saying, In the middle there, that's where the fountain was. A fountain? Oh, years ago, I suppose it's still there, underneath the shrubs and the azaleas. It was all broken up, you see. People took bits of it away, but nobody has put a new one there. It seems a pity. I don't know, I'm not sure. Do you like fountains very much? Ça dépend, said Poirot. I know some French, said Miranda. It depends, isn't it? quite right. You seem very well educated. Everyone says Miss Emmeline is a very fine teacher. She's our headmistress. She's awfully strict and a bit stern, but she's terribly interesting sometimes in the things she tells us. That is certainly a good teacher, said Hercule Poirot. You know this place very well. You seem to know all the paths. Do you come here often? Oh yes, it's one of my favorite walks. Nobody knows where I am, you see, when I come here. I sit in trees, on the branches, and watch things. I like that. Watching things happen. What sort of things? Mostly birds and squirrels. And you watch people? Sometimes, but there aren't many people who come here. Why not, I wonder? I suppose they're afraid. Why should they be afraid? Because someone was killed here long ago. Before it was a garden, I mean. It was a quarry once, and then there was a gravel pile, or a sand pile, and that's where they found her. In that. Do you think the old saying is true, about you're born to be hanged or born to be drowned? Nobody is born to be hanged nowadays. You do not hang people any longer in this country. But they hang them in other countries. They hang them in the streets. I've read about it in the papers. Do you think that's a good or a bad thing? Miranda's response was not strictly in the answer to the question, but Poirot felt that perhaps it meant to be. Joyce was drowned, she said. Mummy didn't want to tell me, but that was rather silly, I think. Don't you? I mean, I'm 12 years old. Was Joyce a friend of yours? Yes, she was a great friend in a way. She told me interesting things sometimes. All about elephants and rahs. She'd been to India once. Joyce and I used to tell each other our secrets. I haven't so much to tell as Mummy. Mummy's been to Greece, you know. That's where she met Aunt Adrini, but she didn't take me. Who told you about Joyce? Mrs. Paring, that's our cook. She was talking to Mrs. Minden, who comes and cleans. Someone held her head down in a bucket of water. Have you any idea who that someone was? I shouldn't think so. They didn't seem to know. But they're both rather stupid, really. Do you know Miranda? I wasn't there. I had a sore throat and a temperature, so Mom wouldn't take me to the party. But I think I could know, because she was drowned. That's why I asked if you thought people were born to be drowned. We go through the hedge here. Be careful of your clothes. Poirot followed her lead. The entrance to the hedge from the quarry garden was more suited to build his childish guide with her elfish slimness. It was particularly a highway to her. She was solicitous for Poirot, however, warning him of adjacent thorn bushes and holding back the more prickly components of the hedge. They emerged at a spot in the garden adjacent to a compost heap. From there, a small, neat garden mostly planted with roses gave easy access to the small bungalow house. Miranda led the way through the open French window, announcing with the modest pride of a collector who just secured a sample of a rare beetle. I've got him all right. Miranda, you didn't bring him through the hedge, did you? You ought to have gone round by the path at the side gate. This is a better way, said Miranda, quicker and shorter. and much more painful, I suspect. I forget, said Mrs. Oliver. I did introduce you, didn't I? To my friend, Mrs. Butler. Of course, in the post office. The introduction in question had been a matter of a few moments, while there had been a paquet in front of the counter. Peor was better able now to study Mrs. Oliver's friend at close quarters. Before it had been a matter of a slim woman in a disgusting headscarf and a mackintosh. Judith Butler was a woman of about 35, and whilst her daughter resembled a dried or wood nymph, Judith had more attributes of a water spirit. She could have been a Rhine maiden. Her long blonde hair hung limply on her shoulders. She was delicately made, with a rather long face and hollow cheeks, whilst above them were big green sea-green eyes, fringed with long eyelashes. I'm very glad to thank you properly, Monsieur Peor, said Mrs. Butler. It was very good of you to come down when Adrini asked you. When my friend, Mrs. Oliver, asks me to do anything, I always have to do it, said Peor. What nonsense, said Mrs. Oliver. She was sure, quite sure, that you would be able to find out all about this beastly thing. Miranda, dear, will you go into the kitchen? You'll find the scones on the wire tray above the oven. Miranda disappeared. She gave, as she went, a knowing smile directed at her mother, and said as plainly as a smile could say, She's getting me out of the way for a short time. I tried not to let her know, said Miranda's mother, almost about this horrible thing that happened. But I suppose that was a forlorn chance from the start. Yes, indeed, said Peor. There's nothing that goes round any residential center with the same rapidity as news of a disaster. And anyway, he added, one cannot go long through life without knowing what goes on around one, and children seem particularly apt at the sort of thing. I don't know if it was Burns or Sir Walter Scott who said, there's a chill among you taking notes. Joyce Reynolds certainly seems to have noticed such a thing as murder, said Mrs. Butler. One can hardly believe it. Believe that Joyce noticed it. I meant believe that if she saw such a thing, she never spoke about it earlier. That seems very unlike Joyce. The first thing everybody seems to tell me here, said Peor in a mild voice, is that the girl, Joyce Reynolds, was a liar. I suppose it's possible, said Judith Butler, that a child might make up a thing, and then it might turn out to be true. That is certainly the focal point from which we start, said Peor. Joyce Reynolds was unquestionably murdered, as you have started. Probably you know already about it, said Mrs. Oliver. Madame, do not ask impossibilities of me. You are always in such a hurry. Why not, said Mrs. Oliver. Nobody would ever get anything done nowadays if they weren't in a hurry. Miranda returned at the moment with a plate full of scones. Shall I put them down here? She asked. I expect you finished talking by now, haven't you? Or is there anything else you would like me to get from the kitchen? There was a gentle malice in her voice. Mrs. Butler lowered the Georgian silver teapot to the fender, switched an electric kettle, which turned off before it came to boil. Dolly filled the teapot and served the tea. Miranda handed back scones and cucumber sandwiches with a serious elegance of manner. Adrini and I met in Greece, said Judith. see, said Mrs. Oliver, when we were coming back from the islands. It had gotten rather rough, and the sailors always say jump, and of course they always say jump just when the thing's at the furthest point, which makes it come to you. But you don't think that can possibly happen, and you lose your nerve and you jump when it looks close, and of course that's the moment when it goes far away. She paused for breath. Judith helped fish me out and made a kind of bond between us, didn't it? Yes, indeed, said Mrs. Butler. Besides, I liked your Christian name, she added. It seemed very appropriate somehow. Yes, I suppose it is a Greek name, said Mrs. Oliver. It's my own, you know. I didn't just make it up for literacy. But nothing Adrini-like has ever happened to me. I'd never been deserted on a Greek island by my own true love or anything like that. Peor raised a hand to his mustache in order to hide the slight smile. He could not help coming to his lips as he envisioned Mrs. Oliver in the role of a deserted Greek maiden. We can't all live up to our names, said Mrs. Butler. No, indeed. I can't see you in the role of cutting off your lover's head. That is the way it happened, isn't it, Judith? And Oliverness, I mean. It was her patriotic duty, said Mrs. Butler, for which, if I remember rightly, she was highly commended and rewarded. I'm not really very well up in Judith to Oliverness. It's the apocryphy, isn't it? Still, if one comes to think of it, people do give other people other children. I mean, some very weird names, don't they? Who was the one who hammered some nails in someone's head? Jail or Cicero? I never remember. I don't think I remember any child having been christened Jail. She laid butter before him in a loud dish, said Miranda pleasantly, pausing as she was about to remove the tea tray. Don't look at me, said Judith Butler to her friend. It wasn't I who introduced Miranda to apotheria. That's her school training. Rather unusual for schools nowadays, isn't it? Said Mrs. Oliver. They give them ethical ideas instead, don't they? Not Miss Emmeline, said Miranda. She says that if we go to church nowadays, we only get the modern version of the Bible read to us in lessons. We should at least know the fine prose and blank verse sometimes of the authorized version. I enjoy the story of Jail and Sissa very much, she added. It's not a thing, she said meditatively, that I should even have thought about doing myself, hammering nails, I mean, into someone's head when they were asleep. I hope not, said her mother. And how would you disapprove of your enemies, Miranda? asked Peor. I should be very kind, said Miranda. In a gently contemplative tone, it would be more difficult, but I'd rather have it that way, because I don't like hurting things. I'd like a sort of drug that gives people euthanasia. They would go to sleep and have dreams. They just wouldn't wake up. She lifted some teacups and the bread and butter plate. I'll wash up, Mummy, she said. If you'd like to take Monsieur Pure to look at the garden, there are still some Queen Elizabeth roses at the back of the border. She went out of the room carefully, carrying the tea tray. She's an astonishing child, Miranda, said Mrs. Oliver. You have a very beautiful daughter, Madame. doesn't know what they will look like by the time they grow up. They acquire puppy fat and look like well-fattened pigs sometimes. But now she is like a wood nymph. One does not wander, but she is fond of the quarry garden which adjoins your house. I wish she wasn't so fond of it sometimes. One gets nervous about people wandering about in isolated places, even if they are quite near people or a village. One's very frightened all the time nowadays. That's why you've got to find out why this awful thing happened to Joyce Mansour-Pure. Because until we know who that was, we shan't feel safe for a minute. About our children, I mean. Take Mansour-Pure out in the garden, will you, Adrini? I'll join you in a minute or two. She took the remaining 2 cups and a plate and went into the kitchen. Pure and Mrs. Oliver went out through the French window. The small garden was like the most autumn greens. It retained a few candles of goldenrod, and daisies in a border, and some quaint Elizabeth roses held their pink, statuesque heads up high. Mrs. Oliver walked rapidly down to where there was a stone bench and sat down, and motioned Pure to sit down beside her. You said you thought Miranda was like a wood nymph, she said. What do you think of Judith? I think Judith's name ought to be Undine, said Pure. A water spirit, yes, she does look as though she'd just come out of the brine or the sea or forest pool or something. Her hair looks as though it had been dipped in water. She too is a very lovely woman, said Pure. What do you think about her? I have not had the time to think as yet. I just think she is beautiful and attractive, and something is giving her great concern. Well, of course, wouldn't it? What I would like, madame, is for you to tell me what you know or think you know about her. Well, I get to know her very well on the cruise. You know, one does make quite intimate friends. Just 1 or 2 people. The rest of them, I mean, they are like each other and all that, but you don't really go on any trouble to see them again. But 1 or 2 you do. Well, Judith was one of the ones I did want to see again. You did not know her before the cruise? No. But you know something about her. Well, just ordinary things. She's a widow, said Mrs. Oliver. Her husband died a good many years ago. He was an air pilot. He was killed in a car accident. One of those pile-up things. I think it was coming off the M. What is it that runs near the ordinary off, I imagine? She was very broken up about it, I think. She doesn't like talking about him. Is Miranda her only child? Yes, Judith does some part-time secretary work in the neighborhood, but she hasn't got a fixed job. Did she know the people who lived at Corey House? You mean old Colonel and Mrs. Weston? I mean the former owner, Mrs. Llewell Smith, wasn't it? I think so. I think I've heard that name mentioned, but she died 2 or 3 years ago, so of course one doesn't hear about her much. Aren't the people who are alive enough for you? Demanded Mrs. Oliver with some irritation. Certainly not, said Pure. I have to inquire into those who have died or disappeared from the scene. Who disappeared? An au-pair girl, said Pure. Oh, well, said Mrs. Oliver, there always always disappearing, aren't they? I mean, they come here and get their fare paid, and then they go straight into hospital because they're pregnant and have a baby and call it Augustine or Hans or Boris or some name like that. They've come over to marry someone or to follow up some young man. Calm yourself, madame, said Pure. There seems to be no reason to believe that the au pair girl has been murdered. Quite the contrary. What do you mean by quite the contrary? It doesn't make sense. Probably not, all the same. He took out his notebook and made an entry in it. What are you writing down? Certain things that have occurred in the past. You seem to be very perturbed by the past altogether. The past is the father of the present, said Pure. He offered her the notebook. Do you wish to see what I have written? Of course I do. I dare say it wouldn't mean anything to me. The things you think important to write down, I never do. He held out the black notebook. Deaths, Mrs. Llewellyn Smith. Janet White, lawyer's clerk. Former prosecution for forgery. Below it was written, Opera Girl disappears. What opera girl? It is the word my friend Spencer's sister uses for what you and I call au pair girl. Why should she disappear? Because she was probably about to get into some form of legal trouble. Pure's finger went down to the next entry. The word was simply forgery, with 2 question marks after it. Forgery, said Mrs. Oliver. Why forgery? That is what I asked. Why forgery? What kind of forgery? A will was forged, or rather, a codicil to a will. A codicil in the au pair girl's favor. Undue influence, suggested Mrs. Oliver. Forgery is something rather more serious than undue influence, said Pure. I don't see what that's got to do with murder. Nor do I, said Pure, but therefore it is interesting. What is the next word? I can't read it. Elephants. I don't see what that's got to do with anything. It might have, said Pure. Believe me, it might have. He rose. I must leave you now. Apologize, please, to my hostess for not saying goodbye to her. I much enjoyed meeting her today. And her lovely, unusual daughter. Tell her to take care of that child. Well, goodbye. If you like to be mysterious, I suppose you will go on being mysterious. You don't even say what you're going to do next. I have made an appointment for tomorrow morning with Messrs. Fullerton, Harrison, and Ledbetter in Manchester. Why? To talk about forgery and other matters. And after that, I want to talk to certain people who are also present. At the party? No, at the preparation for the party. The premises of Fullerton, Harrison, and Ledbetter were typical of an old-fashioned firm of the utmost respectability. The hand of time had made itself felt. There were no more Harrisons and no more Ledbetters. There was a Mr. Atkinson and a young Mr. Cole, and there was still Mr. Jeremy Fullerton, senior partner. A lean elderly man, Mr. Fullerton, with an impressive face and a dry legal voice, and eyes that were shrewd. Beneath his hand rested a sheet of notepaper, the few words on which he had just read. He read them once again, assessing their meaning very exactly. Then he looked at the man whom the note introduced to him. Monsieur Hercule Pior. He made his own assessment of the visitor. An elderly man, a foreigner, very dapper in his dress, unsuitably attired. As to the feet in patent leather shoes, which were, so Mr. Fullerton guessed shrewdly, too tight for him. Faint lines of pain were already etching themselves round the corners of his eyes. A dandy, a fop, a foreigner, and recommended to him by all people, Inspector Henry Raglan, and also vouched for by Superintendent Spence, formerly of Scotland Yard. Superintendent Spence, said Mr. Fullerton. Fullerton knew Spence, a man who had done good work in his time, had been highly thought of by his supervisors. Faint memories flashed across his mind. Rather a celebrated case, more celebrated actually, than it had showed any signs of being. Of course, it came to him that his nephew Robert had been connected with it, had been a junior counsel, a psychopathic killer. It had seemed a man who would hardly bother to try and defend himself. A man whom you might have thought really wanted to be hanged. No 15 years, indefinite number of years in prison. No, you paid the full penalty. And more's the pity they've given it up, so Mr. Fullerton thought in his dry mind. The young thugs nowadays thought they didn't risk much by prolonging assault, to the point where it became mortal. Once your man was dead, there'd be no witness to identify you. Spence had been in charge of the case, a quiet Dodge man who had insisted all along that they'd had the wrong man. And they had the wrong man. And the person who found the evidence that got the wrong man was some sort of amateur foreigner. Some retired detective chap from the Belgian police force. A good age then, and now senile probably, thought Mr. Fullerton, but all the same, he found he would take the prudent course. Information, that's what was wanted from him. Information, which after all, could not be a mistake to give, since he could not see that he was likely to have any information that could be useful in this particular matter, a case of child homicide. Alright guys, I think that's a great place to stop for tonight, especially since the cat's going crazy. And I will see you back here next Sunday for another episode of Halloween Party. We're still